Hey folks, welcome to Thursdays Through the Text. This is a teaching series I've been wanting to start for some time now. We just do so much topical stuff at Focus Press, which I obviously think is important, so much cultural engagement, so much just looking at the world around us today with the biblical worldview, but it's really important to look at the Bible itself and just read through, open the scriptures and take a look at them and keep that side of things going as well, not just topical, but textual. And as I was trying to pick, I thought about starting just in Genesis and marching through, and Lord willing, I'll get to that someday, but it's also really important to talk about Jesus himself. The Gospels that we have show us so much about him, and as I was deciding on what to do there, as I kind of narrowed it down to the Gospels, truth be told, I did a study guide, a brief kind of Bible class in a quarter guide through the Gospel of Mark for Focus Press last year called Walking with the Word, the Gospel of Mark, based on a sermon series I did through the Gospel of Mark over a year or two as I was a pulpit minister. And so I thought, let's just go through that. Let's work through the Gospel of Mark. It's a book I fell in love with as I studied it. It is the shortest of all four Gospels. It is just packed with action. It is very interestingly laid out, and it's a book I really love. It tells us so much about Jesus, and it alternates so quickly. It's been called the comic book of the Gospels, not disparagingly, but just because it's action. It's so fast moving, and there's so much going on there. You have chapters 1 through 7, which are teaching and miracles and a lot going on with what Jesus is doing in his ministry. Then you've got 8 through 10, which is I call the hinge of the book of Mark, where the first 7 chapters, number 1, have been his teaching and miracles, but it's also all focused in Galilee. In the other Gospels, he kind of travels around, he's in place to place. Here it's northern Israel. Then 8 through 10 is kind of the hinge of the book, where he starts to turn his feet towards Jerusalem to head to the cross. He starts telling the apostles, I'm going to the cross, they're going to put me to death when we're in Jerusalem, and of course they're denying that, they're not willing to accept it. And then chapter 11 on is what happens when he gets there, of the triumphal entry, and the challenges from the scribes and Pharisees, and cleansing the temple, and everything that goes on leading up to ultimately his arrest, trial, death, burial, and resurrection. And so, again, a fast-moving book, a book that covers a lot of territory in a short amount of time. And so I'm just going to give this, as I've been doing here, a bit of an overview here for the first one. For these, I'm going to be working through the English Standard Version. Not my preferred version, not a bad version whatsoever, though, and copyright-wise, I just need less permission from them than anybody else. And again, a very useful, very popular version. I love my New American Standard, but they're getting harder and harder to find. And so I'm going to stick with the ESV for these. And it just starts off there, as you can see in Mark 1:1, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. That's Mark's thesis statement. The entire book is about proving that thesis. The entire book is showing how Jesus brought that about, how he, the miracles that he performed, the teachings that he had, and of course it leads you right to the foot of the cross with the Roman soldier looking up and saying, surely this was the Son of God, that he has testimonies all along of what people had to say about him, and what his deeds themselves testified, and what his teaching was, what he taught about himself. And so these days where you have people saying, well, Jesus, he was a good moral teacher, that's not the claim whatsoever. As Mark establishes that Jesus is the Son of God, one of the things he does a lot of that you'll look for in the text is give the reactions. You'll see the words amazed and astonished, depending on your translation, and he will depict after a miracle, after a teaching, just how the people were reacting to Jesus, that they saw him as somebody powerful, as somebody influential, as somebody, as it says in chapter 1 here, somebody whose teaching was not like what they had heard, somebody teaching with authority and just standing out all along and doing miracles that just were not possible. And what kind of person is this? And questions like that. And so establishing this idea. Another word that you're going to see throughout the text is immediately. Immediately something happened. Jesus calls for somebody to be healed, and immediately there happened, or immediately it happened. Immediately different reactions and things like that you're going to see come up in the text, just to show the movement, to show what's going on with Jesus' authority and how it works and things like that, and just, again, a very fast-moving book. One of the other things you're going to see quite a bit, and especially in these first few chapters of his public ministry before turning to Jerusalem, a lot of demons, a lot of casting out demons, a lot of reactions from demons, the conversation with Legion and things like that happen here in these first few chapters. as it's establishing Jesus as this authority, as this Son of God, as this deity figure. And with Mark, his intended audience was a Gentile audience. Some say a Roman audience. Some say that this is Peter's tales not tales, that's a poor word to use, Peter's accounts of his travels with Jesus as given to Mark, as Peter, there's just his fingerprints on it, some of the stories kind of giving his perspective to a degree. And again, possibly written to Romans as you see, number one, Jewish customs explained as to what certain things mean or why they were doing certain things. Less scripture quotation than a book like Matthew, which was written to a Jewish audience and is establishing that Jesus was fulfillment of prophecy and things like that. There's a little bit of that here in the in the Gospel of Mark, as you see just there in verse 2. He's calling on Isaiah, pointing back to, hey, this was something that was supposed to happen. But as a book, it's much different in that way than Matthew was. It is similar. It's one of the three synoptic gospels with Matthew and Luke, and those that word just means seen together. Like they're similar. They overlap a lot. John kind of went his own way and structured his book a little bit differently, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke all contain a lot of the same stories, a lot of the same miracles and teachings and things like that, arranged a little bit differently, focusing on different things. And one of the things I think is really important is to look first at the gospel that you're in and study it from that perspective, and then see what the other ones have to say and why they looked at it a little bit differently. The feeding of the 5,000, what Mark focuses on and what John focuses on are very different. They both teach about Jesus feeding and breaking the loaves and the fish and making a miracle of feeding all these people, but they look at it very differently. And I think it's really important to be able to see those together, parallel with each other. But it's also important to go, okay, what did Mark want us to get from this? What did John want us to get from this? Compare and contrast, and get each writer in their own context, because again, they had different goals. All of them establishing the truth of Jesus and who he was as the prophesied one, the king, the Son of God, the resurrected Lord. They even use different names for him. Of course, Son of Man, very popular in others, and just different things like that focuses that they are going for. Another thing you'll notice is where it picks up here is Jesus' baptism. Here in Mark 1:1, it briefly tells us who John the Baptist was, gives us a summary of how he got out there in the wilderness and the work that he was sent to do. And then you have the baptism of Jesus. He just jumps right into Jesus is baptized and starts ministering. In other books, we have Jesus' announcement, his birth, his a little bit of his childhood in Luke, of course, going to the temple at age 12, and the gifts being brought to him at his birth, and all of those things. Mark just starts off with, here is this man who is the Son of God, and here's what happens with him. And so when you start combining some of these things and the people's reaction to them, the casting out of demons, the emphasis on the Son of God, and all of the things that Mark is putting together in his gospel, you can see why a Roman people that worshipped pagan gods, they essentially had all the same ones as the Greek pantheon, just rebranded Jupiter instead of Zeus and so forth. That with Jesus, it's okay. Here's the God of this God, the God of the Jews, but also he's more important. He's real. He's over and above any God you want to worship. And here's why you need to pay attention to him. Here's why he should get your attention. And I think that's important for us today. Again, going back to that idea of Jesus is a good teacher. No, this is the Son of God. This is the authority above all other authorities. This is the one that we all have to listen to, obey, and give our allegiance and give our lives to him. And so there's a bit of an overview there. There's a lot more you can cover. Again, you've got the outline of the book, chapters 1 through 7. There's a lot of different ways you could outline it. You could outline it much more detailed than that, but on a big picture, 1 through 7, 8 through 10, 11 through 16 is how I like to think about it, and kind of how we'll work through it here. It's very hard to figure out where to break it off, but I will start into the text and the ministry of John and the baptism of Jesus next week. We'll be taking these in 10 to 15 verse sections, which will be 10 to 15 minute video/audio if you don't have time for the video. As always, these will go up on the Church Reset podcast feed, so you can listen to them there. Get your Bible out, study along. As I said, I'll be using the ESV. You can find those, anywhere on your phone, whatever, but they're also pretty easy to find, even for $1 in the store if you want to follow an ESV or in your preferred version. Check out those keywords like immediately, amazed, things like that. The crowd reactions, things, there's just so much we're going to get into, and so I'm going to leave it right there. And as I said, this is the Walking with the Word is my short guide to Mark that is available at Focus Press and Amazon if you want one of those. And yeah, I'm going to drop it right there. We'll make that the introduction, and we'll pick up going through the text, Lord willing, next Thursday.